You are watching part 3 of my story, The Really Cool Scar. If you missed parts 1 and 2, you'll need them for context, and that can be found in the About Me playlists. As before, we will be discussing some sensitive themes, and so if you do not wish to see them, please keep scrolling. When we last left Tony Stark, he is realizing that the Mark II arc reactor that is protecting him from the shrapnel inside of his body is slowly poisoning him. Likewise, when we left off with me, my Mark II arc reactor was also slowly poisoning me, though it was protecting me from the shrapnel events of 2017-2018. While this may seem fairly inconceivable, my spiritual views and certainly my political and economic views had not shifted that much since the shrapnel events. I was generally still pretty conservative, though as I mentioned in part 1, identity politics was not really my thing. But when it came to economics, I was a bootstraps believer. If you said the right things, did the right things, pressed the right buttons, you would be successful and thrive in this world. It was just that simple. So the shrapnel hits me in 2018. In 2022, I became a foster parent, and I adore my children, but the foster care system is entirely broken. That was my first up close and personal experience with something that was just broken beyond belief in an inexplicable and almost like insurmountable way. In 2023, I started working with a psychologist who I will hereafter refer to as Jarvis. Now, when I started, I thought we would just have a couple of sessions to help me understand how maybe my childhood traumas were interacting with children's trauma in the system and learn how to cope with the system in general. And then I'd be on my merry way, healed. But what happened in the very first session was Jarvis asked me if I'd ever done therapy or counseling before, a very normal intake question. And I almost said no because I'd almost forgotten about the shrapnel events. And then I paused and said, well, actually, and told him that I had received some pastoral counseling, but it had ended in what I called an emotional affair and that it was mostly my fault. I went on to describe the events a little bit and then thought we would be done with that question. But Jarvis pushed back. He asked me, why are you calling it an emotional affair? To which I was convinced this man, who was supposed to be a really smart doctor, was obviously an idiot, and responded with recounting the events exactly as I had just done and saying, so that's why I'm calling it an emotional affair. Because obviously he just didn't understand. What I have subsequently learned is that when you are in this mode, psychologists will not argue with you. They will nod in this way that becomes very maddening eventually. And then you will realize that eventually they're going to find a way to ninja Jedi mind trick you. The Jedi mind tricks that Jarvis ended up using were something called cognitive processing therapy. And without getting into all the ins and outs of CPT, I can tell you that it's basically learning how to interrogate your thoughts. And I mean interrogate your thoughts. It's honestly enraging because as most humans, I think, well, I have this thought and I'm fairly smart and rational, so it must be at least somewhat true. I quickly started to learn how much of my thoughts, not only about the shrapnel events of 2017, 2018, but also about myself generally, others, and the world at large, were deeply flawed. The more I interrogated these thoughts, the more my belief system started to come undone, in the best possible way. The bootstraps fantasy quickly disappeared. Complementarianism, as it works in the church, which is basically just blessed misogyny, also faded away. Blessedly, in the last couple of years, I have learned through these practices how to engage in nuance, get in the gray, deal with things that are not black and white. Upon finishing CPT, I ended up designing my really cool scar with my sister. So this is where I will finally reveal to you the finished product. I used the funeral wreath as a framework, but made several adjustments. You'll see that it's the Mark III reactor, the one where Tony has to create a new element in order to deal with the shrapnel. Just like I've had to create new elements in order to deal not only with my shrapnel, but my beliefs about myself and others. It's set on a bed of flowers. All of these flowers are the birth flowers of my family and my kids. In the very center of the arc reactor, I've made an addition. It is the Mind Stone, a nod to all the mind work I've done, also a nod to the stone that merges with Jarvis to become Vision. You'll remember in the original funeral wreath that it's the Mark I arc reactor with the frame Pepper had made for it, proof that Tony Stark has a heart. I decided to do a little riff. I obviously took it out of the frame, and then I took a verse in Proverbs in the original Hebrew, which reading left to right here is Mikol Mishmar Netzor Lebek. All my Hebrew people, I'm sorry for butchering any of that, which is the first part of Proverbs 4:23. Above all else, guard your heart. The second part of that verse says, for from it flows all life. I'd had to create a whole new element, not only to deal with my shrapnel, but to create thoughts from which could flow life rather than death. I had to do that with the help of Jarvis and my friends and my family and my husband, thus the scar. Why am I telling you all of this on a political channel? I'm telling you because I want to be super transparent about who I've been, the ways in which that I have absolutely promulgated harmful belief systems, things and thoughts from which flow death and not life, that I'm still very much undergoing not only a healing but a transformation process. I feel very unworthy to do this work. There are so many champions of human rights and civil rights and progressive policy that are so much further down the road than I am. And I am working out a healing and recovery and hopefully a progressive path forward for not only myself but others in real time in front of you on the internet. I hope now that my motivations, my challenges, and how much further I have to go are completely transparent and clear to everybody moving forward. When Trump got elected in 2024, I had flashbacks like you would not believe to all sorts of things. But I also knew that this time I could not be silent for years hoping that things would change. In the movie Endgame, Tony Stark has just invented time travel, and he is trying to convince himself not to get in the fight. He tells Pepper, "I can just put it away, go to bed." And she responds, "But would you be able to rest?" I am no hero. I just know that I am unable to rest while this fight rages on. So here we are. Thanks for going on this journey with me as I seek to become a menace, but for good.